Last week, I recorded an episode of the S&D podcast about the EU's place in the world. Just as we were about to publish it, Israel and the USA attacked Iran with no regard for international law. Let it be clear, we're not shedding any tears for Khamenei, and our thoughts are with the innocent people in Iran, Lebanon, and everywhere affected. The future of Iran and the broader region must be shaped by aspirations of the Iranian people, not by autocrats, no matter where they come from. Now we see Trump attacking Pedro Sanchez for saying what so many people are thinking. His war is illegal, it is reckless, and it is endangering millions. We stand in full solidarity with the Spanish government and will do everything possible to protect the interest and safety of Europe and Europeans. As the USA behaves recklessly and we suffer the consequences, the world needs moral, rules-based leadership. It needs a strong EU that isn't an American lapdog, but a global power. It's on us to make that happen as soon as possible. Here's the podcast.
Looking at my favorite social, Truth Social, working with a fantastic governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, we are going to send a great hospital boat to Greenland to take care of the many people who are sick and not being taken care of there. It's on the way, President DJT.
Oh my God. Okay, so actually, this makes me angry. Like the fact that the guy that years ago was proposing to inject yourself disinfectant as a COVID vaccine alternative, now it's like putting himself as he's like the healthcare provider. It makes me angry. But anyway, I'm very curious about the opinion of our guest today. Kathleen Van Brent, welcome.
Hi.
Our
Happy
Vice
to be
President.
here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. If you guys don't know her yet, she's our Vice President for International Trade, Development and Global Sustainability.
And enlargement.
Sorry. So many things, So what do you think when you hear this kind of just crazy things?
Not so much anymore, In 2025, that was a horrible year, I have to say. Not on a personal level, but that's not what we're going to discuss. But I think for many people, especially people who are concerned about the state of play in the world, about the state of play of Europe, it was already very difficult. The war in Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza. So we knew the world was really at a turning point and not in a good direction. And then Trump came in. Of course, everything got worse, but also the rhetoric, the way they deal with issues, and the constant lying.
Well, they're increasingly intervening, trying to be involved in our European politics. We saw recently the US ambassador in France is not allowed to meet with the government because he refused to attend a summons. And of course, in Belgium, we have seen that the US ambassador has been meddling and accusing the health minister of anti-Semitism.
Right.
As well.
Can you imagine?
Yes. It's been a crazy week in Belgian politics.
Yeah. It's been a crazy week. And it would be wrong to think that it's just a crazy ambassador in Belgium. We had a security policy, brief from the United States, and it exactly outlines that they want Europe to become the United States under a Trump ideology. So that means white supremacy, conservatism, the tearing down of democracies, tearing down of women's rights, and so on and so on. I think by now people do know what the agenda is. It's also a very anti-European agenda in the sense that they want to tear down the European institutions themselves. So these actions of these ambassadors, they are coordinated. So when the American ambassador in Belgium attacks the judiciary, he attacks the judiciary and the freedom of speech. The chair of my party, Conor Rousseau, is a very flamboyant chair. He communicates as he communicates, but he has freedom of speech, has been banned for a short period of time, but has been banned from traveling to the United States. He had no intention to go there anyway. But nonetheless, it's been lifted now. We'll see.
But it was lifted after a strong reaction
from the government of Belgium and our foreign ministry. it doesn't matter, a ban or not. Again, he doesn't want to travel to the United States. It's a coordinated action, and Europeans should know that we are under attack, and we normally are under attack coming from Russia. And when it's economic attack, it comes from China. We're not used to get these sort of attacks. There's a strong alliance between the Trump ideology and extreme right in Europe. And I see that also in my country, in Belgium, but you see that in France as well. There's a strong connection because they have the same agenda, which is anti-immigrant, very conservative, anti-women, and so on and so on. But you see now that even extreme right is hiding these couple of days also in Belgium on what's happening, because, of course, if you are a sovereignist, then you cannot allow somebody else to interfere. So they're in a very strange position. Yeah. And I think it's also very important that we, as Social Democrats, are very firm on these issues, but also very firm on the solutions. The real sovereignists, that is us. But it's a European sovereignty. That's something completely different than a Flemish sovereignty under the, I always, in Dutch it says under the kerktoren. It means under the church tower, in the sense that it's going back to the old, very white Catholic Flanders that doesn't exist anymore. But a European sovereignty is an inclusive sovereignty because it connects all the countries, all the languages, all the religions in Europe. So we have to build on a very strong narrative ourselves, and we can do that.
Well, this is already like an amazing introduction to all the things we're gonna talk about.
Yes, we're gonna get through all of this, so I should probably do the introduction to the podcast.
Indeed.
So thank you for tuning in to Take a Left, the podcast in the Socialists and Democrats group in the European Parliament.
I'm Irene de la Puerta.
I'm Alex White, and you know Kathleen Van der Hand.
Please follow us in all our social media, subscribe. We are in every platform. And if you are interested in EU topics and the socialist approach, don't miss any episode.
Il Presidente!
Ma cos'è la sinistra?
The resolution is adopted.
It really resonates in my head when you said we are under attack. And the fact that actually, even inside the EU, we have already far-right movements that are really against the basic European values, right? And United States, it's really aware of that, and they are trying to strengthen those poisonous relations for us. Like we have seen recently Marco Rubio coming to Europe, visiting Viktor Orban in a way like, hey, you are my dude, that's exactly the way we want. So having this into account and knowing who is in the power now in the United States, do you really think that we should maybe stop considering the US a friend and act accordingly? Because we are not sharing the same values anymore.
No, but yes and no. I'm the one, together with a lot of colleagues, and I think the full S&D group, that has the last couple of months been very firm on drawing a red line and saying we go no further, especially on trade. Maybe we'll come to that. But the EU-US trade deal, it's the S&D who's been saying this is not going to be acceptable. We're not going to rubber stamp this. And that happened after they violated the agreement, and then Greenland, and then now the illegal tariffs. So I'm a hardliner on that. I had it with the appeasement, especially of the European Commission and of some of our leaders. Think about Meloni, but also others haven't been. Sometimes Macron is strong, sometimes he isn't. You know, you see them doubting all of the time. You should not doubt. You should say this is it. On very firm policies, on interference in our domestic issues, on trade issues. Voilà. At the same time, there's no such thing as one United States. This is a United States government, and I do know, of course, that a majority has voted Trump in, and it's up to them to deal with that. But the American people are not Trump. Maybe the most devastating part of the Trump administration is not the trade part, although we're very much focused on that. It's maybe not the ICE part, but it's the completely destruction of US aid. You know, the United States often been criticized in the past, but it has always been the strong defender and financer of multilateralism and of global development aid, more than Europe. And that has been erased. You know, more than 80% of what the United States spent on aid, especially in Africa and in parts of Asia, it's been eradicated. Today in Sudan, there's a humanitarian crisis that we cannot manage because of that. We need to rebuild that. Together, Europe and the United States, but also with other partners in the world, we need to rebuild that. So I would not turn my full back to the United States, but I would be very firm in what is happening today.
Glad you brought up USAID because it's obviously for the USA, it was not necessarily a hugely controversial issue. And it's something that came for a lot of people out of nowhere. It's not something that he looked like he was going to do in his first term. And I think, we're not talking about Americans, we're not talking about Europeans, but there are so many people that have died because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's unbelievable. And it's so difficult to talk about Trump because, I would try to bring a sort of humorous opening to it. And he's kind of a funny individual, but it's also just profoundly awful. So many of the things that his administration are doing.
It is, absolutely.
It's not as funny as it was at the beginning.
No.
And it has in the end really hard and horrible consequences for us European, but all around the world. I think it was actually Josep Borrell who said it's enough about laughing on his horrible jokes, on his horrible comments and his horrible actions. It's not funny anymore. No. We can keep saying, look what he has said, he's completely crazy. Well, yeah, but he's running the USA.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's destroying a lot of things, and that's why we need to be really vigilant in Europe on it. It's not a joke.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's about how we can respond as Europe, and there's maybe is the argument that, like you say, we've been going too slow. I can't help but think of, I feel like I'm echoing Macron with you as well. Sometimes it's too slow, for sure. But the European Union exists, and we are working to respond and to claim Europe's almost place in the world as a global power. What do you think has to change for us to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and be autonomous or independent of the United States?
We conducted the Green Deal in the former mandate quite successfully, in the sense that we said we will make climate. We had all these youngsters coming on the street, rightly so, to demand more action from the European Union to become a climate neutral continent, and with that, taking the rest of the world. That is also leadership. Leadership is not only when you are a bully and you have a lot of military behind you.
Yeah.
Leadership is looking at the future and say where you want to go for your people and also for the rest of the world. And that's what we did with the Green Deal. It's not a perfect deal or act. There's things that we can change and maybe we've overdone here and there, but that's not the point. The point is the Green Deal isn't just a climate policy. It is a competitive and growth policy. The most easy way to explain that is fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Fossil fuels is terrible for climate. Everybody knows that. So we need to get rid of it. But we don't have any fossil fuels in Europe, hardly, here and there, little. We have some in the Netherlands, some gas.
Yeah.
But let's say very few. The rest of the world has plenty. Russia, United States, Middle East, Venezuela, remember?
Yes.
So a lot of conflicts and a lot of so-called solutions of Trump in his so-called solutions of wars has to do with oil. If we want to be more sovereign, more independent, less reliable, we need to get rid of fossil fuel. If we want to do something on climate, we need to get rid of fossil fuels. So let's do that. And the way that some, also in the European Parliament on the right-hand side, try to undermine the Green Deal, which the main purpose is to get rid of fossil fuels and some other issues, but it's one of the core issues, and it needs a broad approach. So yes, that's what we need to do. We had a good deal. Let's stick to that deal. And of course, we also need to get much more independent with the rest of the world. In this case, it's mainly China, because it doesn't help to say we want to be less dependent on the United States. We also need to be less dependent on China, for sure, on critical raw materials. And we have to defend our industry. If we want to be sovereign in the future, that means that we need to produce our essential issues, products, ourselves.
Yeah.
Indeed, 100%.
That is, but that is a view that is completely new for Europe.
It is new.
It's completely
We weren't
new.
talking like this 10 years ago.
No,
It was,
and it's quite
crazy.
it's in a world where we thought, at the end of the former century, the end of history.
The end of history, Fukuyama.
I think most of us thought that was a nice idea.
Yeah.
And we all wanted to believe in that. The opposite happened. But in that context, it was quite normal to say, it doesn't matter where your steel is produced, where your clothes are produced, if they can do it cheaper, and you can create extra jobs and wealth over there. Why not? If we do that, you try to work on fairness, but that doesn't count anymore today.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we have to produce everything ourselves. We cannot.
Yeah.
We don't want to, and we still want to trade with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But we need to stop being naive.
Yeah.
Exactly. We were actually discussing about it before, and what you just said it really reflects it. Is like Europe has ever considered itself truly like a power, like China does, like the USA does, in the way like we should produce ourselves certain stuff, but we also should be respected abroad. If we have certain rules, people should, follow them and not threaten us like the US is doing now, for instance. So do you think there is maybe like a change of mindset in this way?
Of course, absolutely. It's unprecedented, to be quite frank, but of course the world is changing. Unprecedentedly. We've been free traders for so long, and the whole of Europe is built on two main principles. That is, on the one hand, the peace, and that's under attack now, coming from Russia, and the other is we work together in a common markets, and by doing that, we build on the peace project, but we also create the wealth, and then we trade with the rest of the world. That was always the core. And the third issue that is the basis of the European Union, that is often neglected by many politicians, is the social model. Something as social security in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Spain, in it's different in different countries, but it's all there in different forms, but it's all there, is quite unique in the world. And it also distinguishes us from the United States. Do you remember, of course, everybody remembers Obamacare, and the fight he had to pull, and the fight was already started under the Clintons, but the fight he had to pull to convince the Americans to step into a system where you are obliged to be part of the system so that everybody has access to healthcare.
Indeed. Indeed.
In Europe, it's never a discussion. Not even a right-wing party, not even the most right-wing party, they dare to say, let's abolish the universal healthcare system. But that is also much under attack. And so that are very, very important pillars. But I deviated, because I'm a socialist. I have to tell you about
our social, and that's what we want.
Yeah, because it's so much neglected. Also these days, when we talk about competitiveness, how important it is, absolutely. But the social system in Europe is unique. And that's also something that we really have to defend, because the rest of the world either envies us, or is against it. And so something to keep strong on.
And also the state spends less. Like, we were looking at it recently because we've been publishing these like infographics about it, and even the life expectancy here is like it's about 3 or 4 years higher.
Of course.
Like Europeans live longer and better.
That's why you never can calculate the wealth of a nation only on GDP.
Indeed.
The wealth of a nation is also the distribution of wealth, is also access to public services. It's also the fact that everybody can be who they want to be. So.
Yeah, of course, and that's true democracy.
Yeah, and it's not just health; it's also like public education. Minimum. I mean, we were talking about housing prices before, and we are as socialists trying to tackle this problem. But that's why, for me, at the beginning of the program, we already mentioned it's crazy that he pretends to be the provider of healthcare when actually he was fully against this Obamacare system, and he is from a country where if you don't have the money, you simply cannot afford your chemo treatment, and then you die, and no one cares. So maybe, as you were saying before, is in this kind of matter that Europe should be more proud of itself and show the power.
Yes.
But actually, if you have internally powers that are trying to also undermine this, it is very, very, very complicated.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's mainly our task as social democrats to really explain that over and over again, because it became so self-evident. For my daughter and her generation, it is very self-evident, and that's nice. You don't want people to struggle over the idea when they look to their future, how will I pay for my healthcare? How will I pay for the education of my children? Will I be able to find myself some place to where I can live, not just buy, but place, that sort of stuff. And it is on the siege, especially with the crisis on the housing market is very much in the center. That's why we make it such a priority in what we do here in Europe and in the member states. But it is an integral part of Europe, and that's something that we need to keep on fighting for.
But to defend that, to echo the Draghi report, he says to have this social model, we need to have the economic power to go with it, which brings us to trade. And of course, I think listeners, and myself could be forgiven for being a little bit confused about how trade's gone with the USA. They set up a trade tariff on us. Von der Leyen flew to Scotland. We signed a deal. Now there's new tariffs. The Supreme Court has said it's illegal. Where are we?
Oh my God, it's such a mess. Do you remember the Liberation Day?
I was thinking about the day the pubs opened in Belgium during the pandemic, because we called that Liberation Day. No,
this one was fun.
No, sorry, the US one.
It was the US Liberation Day. I think it was Trump Liberation Day, but that Trump felt liberated because nobody else in the world felt liberated. Even the American people are against these tariffs. So it's quite amazing. But he has some sort of idée fixe that with tariffs he can do whatever he wants, and he can achieve every policy goal that he has.
Yeah.
So first he does whatever he wants. He took a law in the United States that even didn't have a mentioning of tariffs. But he said, no, this will do it. And on the basis of that, he sort of rolled over all these tariffs in the world. And then he used them to force countries or regions like Europe to get into a deal that is only favorable for the United States. I have to say, he was quite successful in that. You see how it works. If you bully somebody with very high tariffs, policymakers, prime ministers, whatever, get so scared, all of a sudden you have 40% tariffs. Your companies, they live on that, on export to us, but also to the United States. If 20% of your production all of a sudden cannot go, it can ruin companies, and it can get people unemployed, and so it's something that really. But that's what he wanted, and then he sat around the table and said, okay, not 40%, 20%, but. I'll tell you the story of Europe. He said not 25%, but he said 15%. But you need to get all your tariffs to zero. And by the way, on steel and aluminium, that's too important for me, 50%. Oh, and by the way, I would want you to buy stuff in the United States for 650 billion euros. And invest for 750.
So this sounds like a bad deal.
But that's the thing. Why we cannot actually react?
It's like this for two reasons. First, we're very scared of the guy. And we're very scared that we will lose on our economy and our people will lose their jobs. And that is a very understandable fear. I have that as well. I come from Antwerp. It's a huge companies in Antwerp. It's a really industrial cluster. It has a big port. Hundreds of thousands of people work there. They make their living over there. But fear is always a very, very, very bad advisor. And I hope the Commission learned a lesson. And there's a second reason. That's Ukraine. And our defense, or the lack of defense, means that we have. we're working on it really very hard and fast, and I think there you can see that Europe is working. It does. If you could not do that on yourself. Even Germany could not. Or we need the European Union to work on much better coordinated investments into defense, but we're not yet there. We still need the backing of the United States, and he also put that on the table. So they agreed with it. We said immediately in the parliament, as SND, we were the only ones. Well, maybe the Greens backed us, saying, we're not going to rubber stamp this. We want to have much more safeguards in this deal. Bernd Lange, who is the chair of the INTA committee and also our rapporteur, did an excellent negotiation on it. And we were almost there. And then the tariffs were made illegal. So it's really important that people understand that this is a good thing. The question has been for many months now, is there still checks and balances? Is that still working in the United States? Because the Congress has been sidelined completely on these tariffs. It's the Congress that needs to decide on these sort of essential tariffs that you use. Completely sidelined. And the Constitutional Court, where a majority of Republicans are in there, are they still there to protect the Constitution or not? And they did. That is very good news. Now I think we should blow off the deal. The Commission is still afraid to do that.
Well, what should it be? What would you do if the Commission sent you? Just say 15%, 15%. That would be fair, or 10%, or even zero. That would, you know what? That would boost the global economy. That would be good for the Americans. That would be good for the Europeans. But that's not, because he's so focused on. He made a very beautiful bill, which is, you know, the mere fact that you call your own bills a very beautiful bill. He made a very beautiful bill, which is an awful budgetary bill, where he cut on US aid, on all sorts of social programs, but he also cut on taxes. And he wants to replace the income tax in the United States with tariffs. It's a completely crazy idea, but that's what he's going to do.
Yeah. So, do you think it's moment to defend ourselves regarding this trade deals with trade instruments?
We've been the group that have called the Commission more than once to launch the anti-coercion. And launching means that you just start the investigation. Don't have to do anything yet, but you start the investigation. The Commission looks at things that happened to see, is there coercion. When he wanted to, still wants to take over Greenland, but you know, we had a week in Davos where that was the issue. He was going to take over Greenland, and he didn't exclude any military actions. And then because a few countries sent one or two military to Greenland to go and have a check, or I don't know, he threatened to impose 40 or 50% tariffs on these countries. Like France, for instance. Although we sent as Belgian also, but he forgot about us. But we felt a little bit sad. No, but having said that, can you imagine what would be the definition of coercion? You could have lengthy discussions on that, but you cannot have discussion whether this is coercion or not. This is economic coercion. You want something, and to get there, you impose tariffs. So I think everybody agreed on that. But the Commission didn't go in that direction at all. They're very much afraid of it. And that is what we need to change. We made the anti-coercion instrument because of China. Not because of the United States, because of China. Because China is doing that all of the time. If a country was one example, I think it was Lithuania, who did something on Taiwan. I think they opened a consulate, or and then China immediately imposed sanctions, economic sanctions on Lithuania. That's that was the trigger to make the anti-coercion. But it's not because we made it for China that we only will use it for China, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that is something that we need to change because you need to tell the United States, look, we have our instruments. We are a democracy. If you are threatening us with tariffs because you want to take over Greenland, or you're threatening us, they threaten us all the time on the digital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On our DSA, DMA, on the AI Act, all of the time. We have the best, and it's not perfect. We need to improve it, especially in implementation. But we have one of the best, if not the best, digital legislation of the world.
Yeah.
It's not just for any reason there. It's to protect our people, their privacy, the fact that you cannot have your photos online if you don't want them.
Yeah.
Grok, you know.
Yes.
That's all. We already have the legislation in place to tell to X, you cannot use Grok in that way. We need to. We are so lucky that we have that already. In many parts of the world, they start thinking about it. But it's, of course, of a nuance, a lot of a nuance for American companies that back the Trump administration. And it's not just that. The Trump administration and the big tech companies also have in common that, let me use the example of extreme violent posts, extreme racistic posts, for instance, which we see, unfortunately, often
every day.
But we didn't for a while, you know, when since Trump came back in, that we see so much more racism. I don't know about you, but
coming even from his own account.
Of course, but I just, you know, even like I follow a lot of football accounts and I see just racist abuse now that I didn't see in the last mandate, you know.
But
just,
it should not.
No, it's awful.
Because we have the legislation, we just don't implement it and follow up on it.
Exactly.
That's, by the way, one of the reasons that we demanded an investigative committee on the implementation and the enforcement of DSA, DMA. And I think we need to work on that because you might have the best legislation of the world, but if it's not implemented and enforced, then of course it's not used. But it's important that people know that extreme posts, violent, racistic posts, they generate so much more money than a post of Kathleen van Bremt saying something about how important the housing.
How much you enjoyed the S&T podcast.
For instance, yes. That's a good example, you know. But fake news, extremism, it gets so much more money. So it's the agenda of Trump, which is a racistic agenda, and the agenda of the tech companies, they align because the one make a lot more money and the other get their ideology through. So that's why they are attacking our legislation. Isn't that coercion? Right.
Indeed, yeah.
Sounds like it to me.
Yeah. I mean, we have been talking a lot about this, unhealthy relationship that we have now with the United States. But for what we are seeing lately, the EU is also trying to build new healthy and nice relationships. So we would like to ask you, is this what maybe Mercosur is about? Is what EU is pretending to do with this?
Yeah. I have to tell your listeners that I used to be very much against the Mercosur agreement.
Okay.
And I like to tell that because it explains the difference in geopolitics since the former term. We were in a completely different world. But I think it's also important that people know that politicians do change their mind. When the world changes, you have to change your mind. And it's a very good example. In the former term, I was one of the drivers to put Mercosur in the freezer, not to vote on it. It was also the time of Bolsonaro and the Amazon on fire. And the fact that the Paris Agreement was not a full part of that agreement. And why is that so important? Yeah, the Paris Agreement. It's not even a sanction-based agreement. It's an agreement of the United Nations. No, it's important. It's what we all decided that we would do in terms of climate. And in the first Trump administration, Trump got out of Paris. Biden came in back into the Paris Agreement. Second Trump administration,
out again.
Okay. Whatever. But during the first Trump, there was Bolsonaro. And he wanted to get out of the Paris Agreement as well. Now Bolsonaro is no longer there. That's good. We have a very nice, good, better president now.
Yes.
Lula. is not a crazy guy in the Mercosur countries. As Milei in Argentina. And of course, you cannot base international trade agreements just on who's in power. That's just the nice thing about agreements. They overlive all these differences. That's good. So I'm not saying that because Milei or Milei or Bolsonaro were there, you should not conduct that. No, absolutely not. But we needed to be sure that they cannot get out of the Paris Agreement, because that for us is essential. And it's a part of the agreement now. So if Milei, and I think the Mercosur Agreement will be dealt with in Argentina this week, he cannot step out of the Paris Agreement without jeopardizing the agreement itself. So you see, I also tell this story because I think it's very important that people know that the European Parliament has a lot of power and uses that power for the good as well. So in this sense. But the main issue, of course, is that geopolitics changed so dramatically. And the Latin America is very important for Europe. And so is East Asia. And that's why we're not just looking at Mercosur, but also looking at India, Indonesia. We're negotiating with Thailand, with the Philippines, and you see there's a lot of eagerness, and that is also something very positive. Again, we have the intention, or it's normal that we get in a slight depression if you look what's happening. But we shouldn't.
No.
There's so many countries that want to deal with us in a good way.
And this is our strength, trade. This is
our strength. The Independence Day. 2 days after Independence Day, almost a year ago, I was in Indonesia. Indonesia, wonderful country, very difficult, complex country, as many countries, but very big, and an upcoming economy. But they were more or less, stalling a lot with the negotiations, and they didn't know. And then they said, well, Europe, with all these rules, you know, it was also the discussion on the deforestation regulation. And so I was there 2 days after the pancarte of Trump. And the mood was completely changed. Also, the way they said it was, we need to get this deal done because we know Europe is difficult. And you come and tell us this climate, this on social issues, intellectual property rights, how we want to deal, and also very much based on an agreement that is that used to be a difficulty. Now they said, we like that part of Europe because it's not easy to form with you an agreement, but we rely on it. And you are a reliable partner, and we know you will not violate it. And it's a real big asset of Europe that of course we ask that rules are done, that climate is important, that social issues are important, but we're also a fair partner. And so that's also what happened with India.
Maybe that's why we should put the focus on when we do like trades abroad, like we are a reliable partner, a strong one and reliable. The others can be as strong as they want, but they can betray you any minute.
No, neither China nor the United States are today a reliable, respectful partner, and we are. And I want us to stay that. I think it's important. That's also who we are.
Hopefully the Trade Ministry of future trade partners are watching.
But I think this is a very nice last, like maybe it can be a nice conclusion.
Moment of optimism. Save Europe through trade.
It's a nice talk.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It helps us a lot on whatever platform you're listening. If you're listening to this and you're not watching it, feel free to go to YouTube and watch our faces. And other than that, we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.
Bye.